All right, I want to officially welcome everyone to What's on Your Plate, a Visit Rochester initiative where we get to say hi to each other at this lunchtime hour and also highlight a member that is interested in sharing what's new, especially how they have pivoted their business or came up with some innovative new ways to help their business grow amidst these unusual times. So today we are going to chat with Jason Barrett. Jason, you say hello if you don't mind.
How's it going, everybody?
There you are. Jason is founder and president of Black Button Distilling. He has made the news since almost the first day that we heard of COVID. Black Button's been right there along with it, rolling and making things better for our community. It was explosive and amazing. What you've done, and so we can't wait to hear more. Let me share a few things, including a picture of Jason. Let's do this. Can you guys see our screen? Awesome. Okay. Well, there you are, Jason. Again, welcome. Can you give us just a brief background about yourself and Black Button before we dive into some questions?
Yeah. So actually, 2 days from now, Black Button will celebrate its 8th anniversary. 8 years. Hi, Brittany. Um, 8 years ago, I was living down in DC. I was working for paychecks. I had a customer who was a craft distillery. I decided their life was much more interesting than my life. So I did the perfectly reasonable thing, quit my job, sold my house, moved to the West Coast to learn how to run a still. And then as I got homesick for Rochester, decided to come back. Nobody was distilling in Rochester at the time. So I had just enough money left to buy that beautiful piece of equipment behind me in the photograph, and didn't know what I didn't know, which was probably also pretty helpful. And we started making vodka, gin, and bourbon. And then about 4 years ago, we started making bourbon cream, which is sort of like a Bailey's type product, but way better. And that was an unexpected success that has now propelled us from being really we were probably about a 5-person company before that. Now we have 83 employees. We distribute in 14 states. We export to Japan. We do all our own production, distribution, marketing, sales. We even have our own farm in the Bristol Hills to grow some of the things that are not commercially available. So we've stayed true to our farm distilling roots. Everything is sourced within an hour of Rochester, and everything is made right there on Railroad Street. It's just been quite the adventure. So
Sounds
that's
amazing.
during normal times. And yeah, what we're going to be talking about today, we shifted from making about 4,000 bottles a week of liquor to 70,000 bottles a week of hand sanitizer.
Amazing. And let's dig into that. So when COVID-19 epidemic started, what happened to Black Button as a business? And at what point did you make that decision to pivot the product?
So when the governor asked for businesses to consider voluntarily closing, we decided that we needed to shut down our production facility. The fermentation process takes a week to 10 days, and the yeast is actually alive in the vats. And if we were unable to get into the equipment for any reason for a prolonged period of time, it would be very messy to clean up after. So we decided to stop brewing, clear out all our fermenting tanks, and try to have the facility sort of ready to be shut down. And it was during that week that it became clear how much of an impact that would have on our employees to be furloughing them. And so I really felt that we needed to keep them employed. At the same time, we heard there was a need for hand sanitizer from Rochester Regional Health. We were able to get our hands on a recipe from the FDA. And before you knew it, we were in the hand sanitizer business.
Wow. Okay.
on the business side itself, prior to COVID, we've got a kind of a breakdown of our sales. As you can see, a good portion of that would require people to be in person. We haven't had a consumer in our tasting room in almost 3 months. Um, so that whole kind of half of the business went away. Bars and restaurants have gone away. So we really had to rethink what we were doing, as well as trying to meet that community need.
Sure. And we're going to look at those crucial days here in just a few minutes, and what happened almost minute by minute with you. But before we get to that, I want to ask about the industry you're in. There are
Mhm.
others that were in the same boat with you, so to speak. And to your knowledge, what do you know is happening across the board? And how's Black Button progressing along with those in the industry?
So the alcohol industry as a whole is up significantly. Um, the 30
Imagine.
increase at liquor stores. The trouble is that it's not tending to be craft spirits. Even Jack Daniels actually has not seen an increase in its normal 750 milliliter bottles, but its magnums, those like almost gallon jugs, are up almost 500%. So consumers are buying brands they know, they're buying less expensive brands, and they're buying considerable amounts of volume of those brands. Because I do think a lot of people are, now that they don't have to worry about driving anywhere, and at the end of a very stressful day, are looking to take that edge off. So the craft distilling part of the industry has basically collapsed. There's been a 70% reduction in craft sales across the country. 87% of tasting rooms are closed. Most of the distilleries are expecting this to be pretty rough, and many of the smallest distilleries, we would be considered mid-size at this point, but many of the smaller ones where the tasting room really is the major driver of the revenue are not going to survive this. So there was 1,800 craft distilleries in the country, 180 craft distilleries in New York State. Everything's pointing to the fact that maybe half, maybe less, will survive the year. And we certainly are working hard to make sure we're not one of the ones that goes under.
Awesome. Okay. Um, there's a statistic here that I believe we want to talk about now. So, what is making you stand out as the largest producer in New York State with the hand sanitizers? I mean, how did you do it?
So I think I think there were a few key things. One, we always intended to do it at scale. If we were going to do this, I didn't want to, I've got great friends across the industry, some of whom made, 1,000 bottles, 500 bottles. You heard reports of people distilling old beer and then taking that alcohol and making hand sanitizer. The trouble with that is that it became clear very quickly that that would not meet the need in Western New York. If we were to use all of our equipment, we would be able to make about 500 bottles a day. And at one point, the orders were pouring in at over 100,000 bottles a day.
Wow.
So that's a mismatch that doesn't work. So instead of trying to do everything in house, which is probably how we are a very self-reliant group, we basically flipped it on its head and said we need to partner with the right people so that we can do this on a massive scale. So we started bringing in ethanol from the Medina ethanol plant. We got glycerol from Fee Brothers, and pretty quickly we were able to just be the packaging center for all of this.
Okay.
So drove down to the middle of the Finger Lakes and bought every hand bottling line that Prospero equipment had. We also borrowed several from several wineries that I know, because all of this has been totally manual production. The hand sanitizers, 80% alcohol by volume. It's incredibly flammable. So even though we have big bottling lines that normally bottle 40 and 50% alcohol by volume, they're just not built to do things like this. So it all has to be done on manual equipment, no electricity, explosion proof areas, staff, social distancing to keep, apart. And so it was getting a hold of those bottling lines and having staff that were committed to running them, and then finding the right partners that allowed us to ramp up from 5,000 bottles the first week to 35,000 bottles the next week to 70,000 bottles the week after that. And I
Amazing.
just give my crew a lot of credit. Both of our assistant distillers stepped up to be shift captains so that we could run 2 full shifts 6 days a week. It was just a Herculean effort from our 83 employees. We were small enough that we could pivot quickly and large enough that we could do it in mass.
And I'm sure with your leadership,
I
that was a
had a
big
little
part
bit to
too.
do.
Yeah, you had a little bit to do with it.
Although I
Excellent work.
think as I look back, I think it somewhat helped that I don't know that I was asking a lot. At one point I called a friend of mine who owns a winery down in Watkins Glen, and I was like, I need your bottling line. And he goes, what do you mean? I was like, I need you to go into your warehouse. I need you to disconnect your bottling line. I need you to put it in your truck, and I need you to bring it to me right now.
So you weren't asking, you were telling. Is that what you're
I mean,
saying?
look,
Pretty
I
much
was
that this needs to happen.
and I was the best man in his wedding. So like we go back a ways.
That helps.
But,
Good for
but he
you.
was like, oh, you mean now? I was like, oh yeah.
Right now.
I'll see you in an hour.
That brings me to a good question. I mean, you're mentioning a couple of partners here that you had with this new venture. Are there any new business relationships that you developed since this happened, or any Visit Rochester members that you want to shout out to that in particular helped you with supporting this pivot?
So I will admit to not having a deep understanding of the Visit Rochester list, but we were working with a lot of new people and a lot of folks we've done business with for a long time. Fee Brothers over on Portland Avenue was critical. In the early days, we were able to get glycerol from them. A company called Tricorbon, which makes coffee creamer out in Brockport, was willing to sell us their coffee creamer bottles, which they don't normally sell. They normally just make them for themselves. Instant Express has been, at one point, I think a full 50% of Instant Express's trucks were just running for us. Genesee Brewing Company was actually at one point, we were ferrying water over from them, because you wouldn't think, like, we live in a big city with, I have 4 different kinds of water in my facility. The main street access is a 2-inch pipe. And yet I was backhauling water from Genesee Brewing because the water needed to be sterile water. And my sterile water plant makes plenty for my normal size, but not nearly enough for the volume we were doing. So we set up with Genesee Brewing to actually truck water in, from the right kind of water in from them. Western New York Energy out in Medina was where all the ethanols come from. Again, we've worked with them as a consultant for a number of years, but never done anything like this. So a lot of people coming together. We had, I was gonna say, we at one point, it was very interesting. We were trading hand sanitizer with Salvatore's Pizza for, they would bring us lunch, we would pay in hand sanitizer.
Wow.
Just a lot of just interesting things. The city of Rochester was very helpful. We managed to get the parking laws changed on Railroad Street because we had been switching at 4 p.m., which required my crew to stop production, go outside, move their car, and
Sure.
get it decontaminated and start back up, which was costing us about a half an hour a day. So the city was kind enough to change the parking time switch to 2 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. I didn't even know you could get parking laws changed.
No, neither did I. That's outstanding. Wow. So
Yeah.
many people from the city to small businesses helping you in this initiative. That's great. There is a visual here that you shared with me. And do you have a minute to touch on this 1, 2, 3 pyramid?
Yeah, so normally everything we do is customer focused first, because obviously building products that customers don't want would not make sense. But also, trying to get it into the right pricing structure and seeing where it fits into the market. And in this, we really flipped that model to where we did, customers really probably wanted smaller bottles with little pump tops, there was a lot of requests, and basically we just decided that the bottle that we are using, which is as close to our normal size bottles as we could get, was really what was best in order to meet the need en masse. Because it basically takes the same amount of time to fill a 2-ounce bottle as a 24-ounce bottle. and the bottling lines were one of the choke points. So we decided to use the larger format bottle so we could get it out into more people's hands, protect the community. I mean, if every bottle has 200 hand washes in it, we have made 8 million hand washes in the last 9 weeks. And again, getting that out to the United Way so that they could provide it to organizations that maybe couldn't afford it or get it to folks that need it, getting it to the hospital systems. So we really wanted to do our best to try to stop the spread of this. The second piece being taking care of our employees. And it's not that we don't care about our customers, but we couldn't respond to all of their requests for different sizes, different packaging, different labeling requirements. We tried that kind of the first week and it just turned into a nightmare. So in order to meet the volume need, we just had to standardize to one package and make as much of it as humanly possible.
Got it. Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of friends that I believe helped you out.
Yep.
Awesome. And so now I wanted to ask you about future plans. Do you have plans to, well, do you have any plans yet to convert back to distilling spirits? Or are you thinking maybe we're going to do a combination of both? What are your thoughts?
So right now we are doing a combination of both. This past week, we were able to get our lilac gin made. This coming week, we are getting our Loganberry gin, which is our Buffalo seasonal, into bottles, while still making hand sanitizer some of the other days. So we have pivoted to where we're now doing some of both because there's still an incredible demand, but it's not nearly as crushing as it was those first few weeks.
Oh my gosh, sure.
So
I believe
now
there's
that
oops, I'm sorry, Jason.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
More to share there?
Now that we're able to spend a little bit more time on the liquor side of things, one other interesting thing that has really popped up.
Yeah.
We really did almost no e-commerce business before COVID. There just wasn't a lot of call for people to buy liquor over the internet, and now it has really risen to being a double-digit percentage. We were able to build some partnerships where we're now shipping to 38 states. We've started a whole online marketing campaign. I don't think we did $10,000 worth of e-commerce business last year, and we did over $10,000 worth of e-commerce this past weekend.
My goodness.
That's been a huge change for us, which has been really important because the bar and restaurant business has totally evaporated. We've seen significant disruption even at the liquor stores. Because again, if people can't go in and see the bottles on the shelf and recognize the brand, when you just pull up to the store and they say, "Okay, what do you want?" Consumers just have to go with what comes to mind. And being a much younger brand with a much smaller marketing budget, we are not coming to mind as often as some of the Jim Beam, Jack Daniel brands.
Right. Seems to be some audio to go along with the next slide, so I'm just going to let it play.
Yep. So yeah, that's the crew actually doing the bottling. And several of our staff members that are in that video are not normally in production.
Yeah, who are our friends in that video?
Huh?
Who are our friends in that video? Who do we see?
Going from left to right, it was Jack Scardino, Peggy Gilmore, and Barry Schenk.
And what are their roles normally?
So Jack's an assistant distiller, so normally he wouldn't be bottling, he'd be running the stills up front. Peggy is normally a bartender, so she's usually making drinks and giving tours. And then Barry actually is the one that runs bottling. But he was running bottling on first shift. And then a gentleman named Dave Paul Hamus, who's a retired physics teacher and professional engineer, took over running bottling for second shift. And again, these are folks that normally either work 9 to 5 or work tending bar on the weekends, and now we're asking them to come in, from 7 to 2 or from 2 to 9, and it's very manual labor. Again, if you play it one more time, you'll see them handing the bottles to each other.
Sure.
because until you get, the only automation is the labeling section. Everything else had to be done by hand. And what you can't quite see from the video, there's another team just to the left of Jack running another filler and hand tightening the bottle tops on. Man, yeah, every bottle top had to be put on and turned manually. So 400,000 caps manually applied over, a 9-week period.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it wasn't just the product that pivoted; it was the staff itself as well
yes.
that moved into new roles and hopped on board.
Yep. Yeah, and our sales reps had to take on new roles in terms of working with hospital systems and filling out much more complex paperwork than we normally have to deal with. Our marketing team trying to both help us tell this story as well as bring e-commerce up and running. Our accounting team having all of these different both revenue and expenses coming. And I know this is really odd, but I don't think we could have actually done this without American Express.
Really?
Our business credit card at one point got up to about $300,000 because in those early weeks, nobody wants to give us credit. They've never, dealt with us before. We have to buy the supplies. We can't get terms. So we just were putting everything on the Amex, and my CFO would check it every night to see if they were going to cut us off. And luckily they didn't, and we paid it all back. We got paid for all the hand sanitizer, but had they cut us off, I don't think we would have been able to make nearly as much hand sanitizer.
Right. You shared a few bullets of what you've learned in all this process. Is there anything here you especially want to touch on for our members today?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting ones, which is at the top, obviously we all want data and data-driven decisions, but when there's this much turmoil, you kind of have to follow your gut to take advantage of these things and meet the need, because it's not about what the situation looked like last week, it's what's the situation going to look like next week.
Right.
So we had a ton of people in the early days being like, oh, it won't be that big of a deal. You'll be able to get Purell next week, no problem. Don't even bother. Well, 400,000 bottles later, so instead of looking at what had happened, we were trying to project what we thought would happen. And really just thinking about everything sort of in small steps. We didn't have to figure the whole process out day one. We had to just keep chipping away, kind of like running the hurdles is the way I've described it. As you get over each hurdle, you have to look at the next one and get over that. But it was really, it was key, the employees we had that helped us get over these things, and that divide and conquer mentality. And we really have a very decentralized company for the most part, where the department heads are given wide latitude to take, care of things. And that was, again, critical, because I just had to say to the sales guys, okay, this is your pricing. This, here's a Google Doc. Put your orders into this Google Doc and go for it, because I've got to help production actually make all this stuff. You guys just have to, start calling hospitals and vet clinics and nursing homes. I mean, we delivered to over 500 doctors' offices, 12 different hospital systems. We've shipped tractor trailers to Detroit and Louisiana, all over the place. And many of those, I had nothing to do with, because there wasn't nearly enough time. The sales reps just had to manage it themselves. And
that's amazing.
Very many, without too many hiccups.
Very cool. I'm curious to know if the sales team enjoyed selling hand sanitizer as much as they enjoyed selling spirits. If you have a quick minute, tell us about that.
I mean, my head of sales, John Vogel, remarked it was the oddest thing that he's ever sold.
Sure.
Worked for Napa Auto Parts and sold commercial real estate before that, and was a Budweiser sales rep before that. But it's the first time that the only thing that mattered was when could they get it. Oh. Nobody cared about the price. Nobody cared about occasionally there were discussions about packaging of what people wished existed that just didn't. I mean, the little pumps that go into like pump bottles, most of the manufacturers are currently taking orders for March
Okay.
of 21.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they just don't, the usage rate has gone up so much that there just isn't the capacity, not only in this country, but in China. I mean, we actually had to, the little heat shrinks that show you that the bottle is closed, we had to air freight in 500,000 of those from Germany in the middle of all this because our US suppliers were all out. But anyway, yeah, for the sales reps, I think it was an interesting experience, but I think they're happy to be back mostly selling liquors.
I'm sure. And so are we.
Yes.
All right. At this time, I would love for those of us on the call who have a burning question they want to talk to Jason about, please unmute yourselves. Let's do this informally. Who has a question?
A hearty hello, Jason. Michael Hardy. FOB3C from the very beginning. Friend of Black Button Bourbon Cream. Feel free to use that.
Well, we certainly appreciate that support.
I've been pushing the black bourbon here in Chicago, but I'm heading back to Rochester, so I'll be a local again. I'm just kind of, thank you. I'm thrilled with the partnerships. I think that's the most exciting part of that, particularly since Visit Rochester and particularly the Visitor Industry Council, that's what we not only survive on, but thrive on. I'm curious if you feel like the partnerships will be something that you'll be able to continue because you're planning on continuing this indefinitely?
So, yeah, I mean, as long as there's a need, we're happy to make hand sanitizer now that we have the supply chain and the process set up. And again, it definitely helps. So there's really no reason to upend any of that, especially because we were fortunate that the suppliers we're working with are mostly local. We've had a couple of them where we knew of them but didn't know them well, but now that we do and better understand their capabilities, we'll be able to work with them even more. So I definitely see those. There was both the partnership from an immediate need, but also from a long-term vision standpoint. I think those partnerships will just grow. That's my hope anyway.
Terrific. We used a spray bottle. We poured it into a spray bottle that we use for our water for ironing. And so we use that.
Yep. Yeah. We've seen a lot of photos. Luckily, the top that is on this is one of the most common thread tops called the 2410. So a lot of people have found that they have either a sprayer or a pump that fits.
Right.
And we're often able to point people to like Amazon listings that have 10 or 12 that they can buy. The trouble is I need like 200,000 of them.
Right.
To buy that on Amazon.
Everyone has a spray bottle they put their water in for their ironing. So just tell them to use that.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for making Rochester proud.
Doing our best.
Thanks, Michael. Anybody else got a question for Jason?
I do. So fun fact, I got to do Jason's wedding at the Penthouse, which was awesome. I got to sit with them and actually blend a special bourbon for that event. My question to you, Jason, is any thoughts on doing some sort of, I don't know, free at last commemorative blending of bourbon to release into the wild to, hey, we're free again?
Interestingly enough, we did actually just do our 18th blend of bourbon this past week. So that'll be out probably around the end of June.
Yay.
I hadn't thought about doing any sort of special piece, but our head of marketing is making a note there. So Brittany, if we use that, can I bring you a bottle as payment for the idea?
Absolutely. And oh, by the way, your bourbon cream makes an outstanding ingredient in an espresso martini. By the way, I'll send you the recipe if you want. You can add it into your lexicon.
Wonderful. And yeah, no, the wedding, which is coming up on a year, we're in 11 days, it will be 1 year.
Yay.
Wife and I got married at the Penthouse. We often talk about that wonderful night.
Well, how ironic that your next blend is 19.
There you go.
Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else want to shout it out?
I know somebody wrote in the chat a question about the Loganberry gin. So Loganberries are basically a cross between blackberries and raspberries. It's a almost cult-like flavor profile in the Buffalo area. They used to have a local amusement park called Crystal Beach that I guess was kind of their version of Seabreeze that made its own Loganberry soda. And although it closed in the 80s, Coca-Cola has continued to make that soda only in Buffalo. Occasionally, you'll find it in certain Wegmans in Rochester. But anyway, this will be our third year for the way the Lilac Gin reflects Rochester history with the Lilac Festival. Our Loganberry Gin reflects that Buffalo flavor profile. And it's probably it's one of our top 10 seasonal releases. We do a number of seasonal gins throughout the year to reflect local flavors or different historical events. Just such a fun, flavorful spirit to play with, because also within about a week of making it whether you did it right. And we have a small test still in the back where I can make about 100 bottles at a time and make different iterations. A little harder to play with because you have to wait about 3 years to find out if your recipe worked and then tweak it from there and start over. So although we have a few experimental bourbons in the warehouse, it's just a much longer R&D cycle for bourbon. Question just popped up about other whiskeys. So although we predominantly make bourbon, our main one being our 4-grain bourbon that most people are familiar with. We do have a pre-prohibition style bourbon that comes out every summer just in our tasting rooms. Every fall, we do a Empire Rye, which is 95% rye, all grown right here in New State, 5% malted barley. So that comes out about every October. And then this July, for only the second time in 8 years, our peated all malt whiskey, which is what most people would consider Scotch, but since we're not in Scotland, we can't call it that. But our peated all malt whiskey will come out this in partnership with Restaurant Good Luck. So they were the ones that pushed us to make it, and they buy all of it. It's actually the only product I've never sold in my own tasting room because they buy the whole batch every time. They will be doing fantastic cocktails with our luck almost a couple weeks. So yeah, we do a couple of exciting pieces. And I somebody asked on the chat whether the Loganberry would be available on Railroad, and yes, it will. So I think they're targeting early July. It'll also be in local liquor stores. So the Loganberry finds its way throughout.
It all sounds so great. We can't wait, Jason. Thank you so much. Before we get to chatting with each other and finding out what's on your plate too, I just want to mention that Greg LaDuca and myself are here for you. This is a new initiative, as you know, and we want to welcome attendees, participants for planning, and those who are interested in maybe being spotlighted on a What's on Your Plate lunch date with us. So here's Greg's information. Also, if you're not a member in on this call and you want to talk more about being part of Visit Rochester, again, reach out to Greg. His email and number are here, and my information is there as well in case you need anything from me. That's about it. Jason, thank you so much. You've been an amazing spotlight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you betcha.